Well, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Smith, the Platform Development Leader for the Boeing Company and Boeing Information Technology. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how we're using AWS to really drive innovation in a couple different areas of our business. So we're going to walk through and tell you a little bit about the backstory. For those of you who aren't familiar with Boeing, we'll tell you a little bit about what Boeing does, if there's anybody who doesn't know. And we'll talk a little bit about probably what you don't know, which is going into a lot about how that airplane takes off, brings you safely to Vegas, and as long as you make the flight, actually gets you home. So let's start by talking a little bit about the Boeing Company. One of the largest manufacturers in the world, in fact, the largest manufacturer in the United States and the largest aerospace company in the world, made up of two primary divisions, Boeing Commercial Aircraft and Boeing Defense and Space Systems. Boeing as an organization is almost a 100-year-old company. But while it's 100 years old, Boeing has at its core the innovation of the technologies of its times. In 1916, William Boeing launched the first Boeing aircraft, a B&W seaplane with a 52-foot wingspan. In 1950, Boeing's board of directors made the decision to go after the first highly successful jet aircraft in the commercial aviation space. They'd already proven that they could do it. They had the technology in their pocket. They knew what they could do from an engineering standpoint, but they made a decision, and they literally bet the company on innovating on a commercial airliner with jet engines. Nobody had done it successfully that was accepted by the market, that was safety-focused, and could fly without having incidents. Boeing had and did launch that airplane in 1954 with no customers for it. When they took off with that airplane, the prototype, which was called the Dash 80, they flew over Lake Washington in 1955 at the Seafair Games, and all of Boeing's board of directors was on a yacht out there in Lake Washington. And the plane comes around the corner, and Banks coming in, and sure enough, as they come around the corner, the test pilot, chief pilot for Boeing, just looks over his co-pilot and says, "All right, watch the pitch, I'm going to roll it." He rolled that Boeing 707-80 aircraft in a full 360-degree barrel roll at roughly 600 feet over top of Lake Washington. Pretty sure Boeing's board of directors all collectively had a heart attack at that moment, as the airline executives sitting next to them were awed. And then not only to prove it once, they banked around and did it again. You know, Boeing as a company is focused very much on the safety of its products. We have customers in over 150 countries, and we have 170,000 employees. We are over an $80 billion company. So when we stand here on stage at reInvent and we talk about innovation, we're talking about our products, but we're also talking about the technology of the times. What we're doing now is the next jet aircraft. It is what is foundational to so many products and foundational to Boeing. So within Boeing, one of the key differentiators for us is our services business. And our services business is broken up on the commercial side into four primary areas. It's got material services, which is about the parts that go on the aircraft. Fleet services, which is about anything you do to that airplane once it's on the ground, and anything you have to do in terms of the maintenance and capabilities. And then flight services, anything for the pilot, anything leading up to and part of flight. We also have a handful of key subsidiaries, Jeppesen being the most notable, who has a series of industry-leading products and capabilities that really deliver the very best situational awareness in the industry and are truly industry standards across the aviation industry. That final one is where we're going to focus today, information services. Boeing traditionally has had a focus on the pilot, the operator, the cabin crew, the materials folks who are processing the orders. It's a little different game when you start talking about the software that has to drive in that sphere. So one of the things that Boeing did is they organized their business units, and they organized specifically information services around the concept of digital aviation. And digital aviation was all about solving the airline's pain points. The first of which was that while we have these great new aircraft, 787 being the greatest example of truly cutting-edge technology in the aviation sphere, it was very difficult to understand how those advanced aircraft, with all of the information and systems and connectivity that aircraft brought to bear, how do we tie that into our legacy operations, right? In the United States, the average fleet age of any aircraft that you step on is somewhere between 15 and 20 years on almost every major U.S. carrier. Around the world, it varies wildly depending upon the region that you're in, but think about it. How many of you are holding, let's say, a 3-year-old cell phone in your pocket that wasn't company issued? Looking back at the technologies, the methods, the communication protocols that were necessary to communicate with those aircraft means you have to take a step change in terms of what you can do with that data. So understanding how parts, because remember in a highly regulated industry like aviation, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I'm gonna go push an update to the aircraft. Those updates have to be cleared, they have to be processed, they have to be signed off, and every piece of software that touches that aircraft that is going to interact with an airplane system is a serialized part. Imagine how many times you'd get your apps updated if you had to go ask the US government for permission before you got to publish to the Google Play Store or to iOS. The other pieces that are really key today in our services business that haven't been, I'll say, optimized in the last 10 years is really the idea of parts management and the ability to see what you don't know, right? The unknown unknowns for airline operations. One of the great opportunities that Boeing has in today's business is to take all of that data, all of the information, and really transform it. Try to give it context and then help the airlines see what they can't see for themselves. Especially for your smaller carriers, anytime you're looking at a fleet of 10 or 15 aircraft, it's hard to find that commonality. In statistics, you simply don't have a meaningful sample in order to work from that data. For Boeing, we've sold a lot of aircraft, a tremendous amount. That 707 that I talked about, they sold 1,000 of those before retiring it. In the 737 family, we're into the multiple thousands of just the versions within the next generation family, and we're over, I believe, 1,000 orders and deliveries, or close to 1,000 orders and deliveries for the 787. And finally, that last one, which everybody hopefully identifies with by being here, unless you're wearing the little gold lanyard. You know, the key is that IT infrastructure is not cheap either, right? So you may go and buy an aircraft that's going to cost you $80 million, but how many servers are you going to have to put in your data center to talk to that new aircraft, and how's your capital planning going to go? One of the things that's probably unique a little bit, I'll say somewhat unique to the aviation industry, is that from a profit margin perspective, it's always been in single digits. Over the last 40 years, the operational profit margin for the aviation industry for airlines is under 5%. So with that in mind, how do we address the challenges? So innovation coming back to the forefront, the goal for digital aviation and the Boeing company, the goal of working with Amazon up front was to understand that we have to attack those data elements where they exist in silos. The parts data that went into an old mainframe that's sitting on top of an old, token net line, because that's the only way the infrastructure goes in where the mainframe is. All of those components have to be able to talk to each other. So how do you break that out? How do you extract it? And then as new data comes in from your new aircraft, from your operations, how do you feed that data in? So we're really spanning the gamut. This isn't quite as simple as deploying a single application, calling it an EC2 cluster, wrapping it in a VPC, and calling it done. It's a touch more complicated than that. We also have to have key data attribution. You know, one of the questions that I often got at the beginning was, Kevin, you're trying to boil the ocean. I said, no, I'm not trying to boil the ocean. I just want to soar at 30,000 feet, and I don't want to go at 10 miles an hour. I'm not a glider. I have jet engines. That's the answer that we're going to proceed forward with. And the answer for us in digital aviation was to focus on what information was critical. The most critical one here, you can see it here in the room, the content not aggregated by fleet or tail, right? Associating the information and the data that you're receiving, from the parts data to the maintenance data to the planning data to the flight data to the crew data and all the resources that go along with them. Attaching it to a tail number gives it context. Now you can think about external factors like weather, right? Like notice to airmen that have to go out, things that give you, as a pilot, situational constructs. That really starts getting you down into the realm where you can connect things as Boeing for our customers that we never would have been able to connect before. So let's talk a little bit about the strategy. Today, when you took off, and then the picture on the previous page here, this is looking down, looking south at Seattle's 16 right, when you take off, and I flew down obviously from Seattle to come down and visit with you all, you have to trust the Boeing company for the aircraft that you're sitting on. You have to trust the airline for all the things that they had to do to keep you safe while you were in the air. You have to trust that the pilot has the credentials and the capabilities and knows what he's going to do. And you have to trust that that mechanic who started the day long before you ever got out of bed knew what they were looking at was an authorized document. They knew exactly what they needed to do to make a maintenance item, to inspect something, or to, if needed, replace or repair something. So when we talk about the digital airline and we talk about the concept of Boeing's digital aviation strategy, we start with that airplane. We start with things that give us information, software products, capabilities, network topologies, all the things that allow us to truly be successful as a supplier to these airlines. Then we have to construct and understand the workforce, the people, the resources that are involved in order to be able to use all of those resources. We have to optimize that by really taking in and giving it that context, starting to get down the road of analytics and really asking the right questions that yesterday you didn't even know how to ask, let alone how to answer them. And finally, we have to take it at this top level, and this is something I can't emphasize enough. Security is critical. You can make the most beautiful and wonderful solution, but if you break that trust, you will have challenges, right? And in the aviation sphere and with Boeing, nothing is more important than safety. For some of these things, you have to be real time. You have to understand how that data provides me immediate construct. Jeppeson's got some amazing products that do this, especially with their flight deck software and some of the Flight Deck Pro and the fleet planning information that they have, the information they give to pilots with real-time weather updates. They're streaming to their iPads, sitting in the cockpit. Boeing is taking that same sphere, digital aviation, and expanding it just beyond the flight deck, looking at the entire aircraft, the airline's operational model, their approach. And all of these things are critical with one thing in common, and that's this blue bar in the middle. That data sharing system is what we call the platform. Right? It's more than simply an enterprise service bus. Right? It's more than simply data services. Although we do leverage and use a SOA construct, the services-oriented architecture, while that's critical in what we do and how we do it, what's also critical is understanding that these disparate systems are still going to be disparate. We don't have the ability to greenfield an airline. If we did, it would be very interesting and it would be very fun. I'd love to have that project, but we live in the real world, and in the real world, those legacy systems have to be addressed. We have to look for opportunities to find that data, extract the parts that we need, and then work with the business logic that we have to have for that scenario. But the first step to all of that, you could have the most wonderful business logic, but if you don't have the data available to you from those different domains at the airline, it doesn't help you. And in certain situations, as Boeing has responsibility, and again, part of it being a highly regulated industry, Boeing provides things like the fleet manuals, the information that is actually necessary for that aircraft to be certified, for maintenance to be performed. It's not like you roll the airplane up to Jiffy Lube and 15 minutes later you're good to go. It's slightly more complex when you need to address large commercial aviation aircraft. So you have to also respect the fact that we have to pull in not only Boeing data but also other data. Right? So Boeing, for example, does not make the engines that go on that aircraft. They're made by different manufacturers, and they are fantastic companies in their own right, and they do amazing things with those engines. The newest ones on the 787 are absolutely incredible, and the size and capacity of those engines, while the fuel efficiency, the fuel sipping approach to that 787 really changes the economics. So remember I mentioned earlier that we talk about a 5% profit margin is a really great space for an airline to be in. Those new engines can deliver a 20 to 30% operational efficiency. And with fuel as high as it is, that's some of those things that are simply transformative for the business. And those businesses, right, they have to worry about that bottom line every way along it. So in this construct, in the digital aviation sphere, how do you answer that question, right? Well, you have to get the information about your revenue flights. You have to know how many people are on that aircraft so you can associate the load of an airplane. You have to understand who you're crewing it with and how flight is working and how weather is impacting those flight scenarios. You have to understand what maintenance has to be done. But above all of that, you have to be sure you're right. because if you're not complying with the standards and expectations that you have as an organization, as a regulated entity, you will simply not be able to operate. And that's going to be the game changer. So when we talk about technology and we talk about leveraging innovation, we're starting at that airplane, but we're also looking at the operational efficiency on the ground. We look at the fleet and maintenance solutions, the ability to work through those challenges, whether or not they be on the ground or in the air, or if they're at a distant airport, or if it's a disrupted operations scenario where we have weather or some other impacting factor that's grounded the airplane. We have to be able to optimize the aviation infrastructure. And when I say that, one thing that's really interesting that I'll share with you is we've been doing some really unique things, and I'm going to get into the platform concepts here in just a minute. But one of the most interesting things that we learned, and I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but we'll talk about it here. This signal that is kind of ensued here, assuming that's a Wi-Fi signal for just a moment, we walked into some of our challenges with some of our products, with some of our beachhead customers with some of these products, and we made what I will say is a great learning assumption. We thought, it must be possible that a large U.S. metropolitan airport that services international and national flights on a large scale will have a reliable network infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. No. That was an assumption that was made and thankfully validated early in the process. We'll talk about the agile development approach and the agile infrastructure approach we took, but coming up with solutions to that, not taking things for granted that we take for granted here, right? That certainly our expectations in the technology sphere because of what we know we can do with devices and how connected those devices can be, dealing with an infrastructure that is literally physical, brick and mortar capabilities that you can't just wish away, and sometimes you can't just simply attach a little access point and call it good either, because maybe you have to replace all of the networking capabilities and maybe you have to go over the air in the beginning because you can't tap into, for whatever reason, that legacy infrastructure is insufficient for what you need it to do. So thinking about it in terms of those products is really what is the challenge here. So now we're getting into the fun part. The key for us on the technology side is understanding that this is a new world. I was here last year sitting in those chairs, and I was so jazzed when I went back, and I said, we're on the right path, we're doing the right things. We've been working with Amazon now for about 2 years. Right? So our journey has been about 2 years long. I was here yesterday in this room, and the speakers were talking a little bit about their experiences and their history and the kind of cost structures and approach. And I'm not going to get into numbers here, but I can tell you that we have been orders of magnitude from where we started in our first 6 months with Amazon. And I can also tell you that the tremendous efficiencies we get, not only in the cost of servers, the cost of storage, the cost of network bandwidth, but really in that time to spawn, right? The ability for us to know that we need something and then it's there in minutes, not in weeks. And so having that agility along the way really allows us to focus on the right things, focus on information management. Where do we need to get the data from? Where can we gather the data from? And how do we leverage it in a reliable and available way while maintaining the security that the airlines expect? How do we handle it when suddenly a weather storm moves in and Dallas-Fort Worth is closed? How do we handle the information coming off of those aircraft, and how do we correlate that data? So understanding what the cloud can do for us, what infrastructure as a service, what Amazon can do for us, to that scaling capability to truly throw at it a bunch of data that as of 10 minutes ago didn't exist. And being able to draw not only from those sources at the airline, but also public sources of air traffic control information. A ground stop being issued, for example, in Dallas would have a huge impact. Well, the airline systems are just getting that information. How do we make sure that that information is available in the solution set immediately so that it's not just available in one product, not just available just to the pilot, but available to flight operations, available to crew and resource scheduling, available to passenger and revenue management, all at the same time. And then really examine what that does to our business models. Boeing as a innovative company, we've looked at for years, and we've always struggled with, I'll say, the opportunities to say, how does a technology in the IT space impact a product? And this is really an opportunity. This is an area where digital aviation has gone above and beyond anything I've seen in my tenure at Boeing, where the focus has really been enabling the system development and literally new products, new innovative products that Boeing didn't ever have a Boeing name on. Right? Things that were just assumed to be capable or assumed to be somebody else's challenge. So where Boeing as an enterprise is really having an opportunity and where a growth play truly exists for the enterprise is to ask the fundamental question, what don't I offer today that my airlines could use, but they don't even think to ask me for it? That's what digital aviation is all about. That's where the transformative change. And so part of that transformative approach is to understand the difference between the platform level and the infrastructure level. So the infrastructure, Tom Erickson, the crew at Amazon, fantastic people. Absolutely wonderful to work with, wonderful to get us the information that we need. We've got some great system support along the way. It's been awesome. We've got some really interesting lessons that I'll talk about in just a couple of slides, some specific products where we've seen some unique things, where we've been pushing the bounds of what the AWS team had envisioned a capability to leverage and use. But everything above that layer, all of those things above the infrastructure as a service, right, is really where the proof is in the pudding. How do you produce the ability to have reusable application services, to really leverage and have a standard user experience? So part of what I guess I'm telling you is that it's more than just consume the infrastructure and be done. For Boeing and from an enterprise perspective, you have to worry about things that are not just infrastructure as a service, not just simply how quickly can I spawn a server or how quickly can I leverage it. It really comes down to how do I make the business be successful and how do I leverage the capabilities that are available to me to do it. You can see some of the key logos around here. Obviously, the Boeing logo. Tapestry Solutions is a Boeing subsidiary. They have been a great development partner with us. They're based in Southern California, and we just have had a wonderful development team that really has learned and been able to really leverage those cloud computing capabilities. We'll talk a little bit more on the people side, one of the lessons learned around people management, but finding the right partners and finding the folks who are willing to do something that yesterday they didn't know how to do is absolutely critical. And that's something where where I'm very proud to say we have succeeded by leaps and bounds. Okay, so now the Architune, which got roughed out a while ago. The chief architect of the platform, Peter Cornett, and myself sat down and drew a bunch of pictures on the whiteboard. That's the good thing for you all is the fact they didn't give me a whiteboard up here, so you don't have to look at my back the entire time. But we got on a whiteboard, we drew out this concept of what is the platform as a service for digital aviation. Now, we don't pretend, and I'm not suggesting that this is your platform. There are a lot of key features in this PaaS layer that are things that are common to all platforms, and this is certainly based on our learnings, our research. A lot of published material is out there. There's papers from Forrester and Gartner, and if you haven't read them already, go read them. You're probably going to get a very similar look and feel to what these are. But understanding this was at a level that we could communicate both up the technology side within Boeing, up the IT organization, who really had responsibility for defining those enterprise architecture standards, the things that were going to change what was okay to use for an application developer, right? So this was the ability for us to put it at that contextual level, the 30,000-foot level, to paraphrase the aviation term, and look at it and say, what key components do we have to have, and how do we use them and leverage them? The top section of this, from my perspective, is nearly immaterial. And I say that with a grain of salt because obviously I care. I care about how you're accessing the platform. I care about how data comes into the platform. I care about the reliability and availability of those systems because I may want 4 nines of availability, right? 50-something minutes a year of downtime. That's great. But if I can only connect single pole VPN to a back-end system, I'm probably not going to get 4 nines of availability out of that. So I do care. But from my perspective, the key for Boeing, the key for digital aviation, was to be able to establish the patterns of architecture so that the application developers, the folks who are doing mobile development, we've got a great crew of mobile developers in digital aviation, and those folks who are churning out those apps and churning out those new products really have the ability to leverage a reusable set of capabilities. We're not going to get away from the desktop and laptop experience. I know, when we were over in the boot camps, everybody's working on a laptop, and I see a handful out there now that are up and working. In the maintenance sphere, right, in the area where you're actually going to go work on an airplane, a tablet is usable. A phone, Maybe, depending upon how weather resistant it is, because these mechanics don't get to just hang out and wait for the weather to pass. They get to go greet that aircraft whenever you land, and while you're cozy and comfortable inside, it's pouring down rain or hail or snow or worse as they're trying to service that aircraft. So understanding the limits of the technology and what has to happen for those technologies means that we don't get away from having a ruggedized laptop, right? One of those crazy Toshiba Toughbooks that you can kick 3 feet across the room and have it still work the way you want it to, right? You're still going to have those things. So you have to work within the browsers and the technologies that you're going to have at hand. You can't just wrap it all native. So within that platform as a service layer, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes across this thing. If we need to come back here at questions, let me know. I want to make sure we give enough time for questions at the end, so I'm going to cruise off of this slide in just a second, but if you want to come back here, I'm more than happy to do so. That application platform, for us and our initial focus, we focused on Java. Right? We have lots of things within Boeing and Boeing IT. We support lots of different OS versions. We certainly are a great partner with Microsoft, and we use a lot of their servers and their technologies. But within this platform, we focused on the Java stack. We focused with Linux on the bottom end, and really looked at optimizing those comparative capabilities. Now, if and when we look at a legacy product that we decide to migrate, whether that means porting it, whether that means looking at it and decomposing it and making it SOA compliant, whatever that may look at, we may reach that point to where we have to go and understand how this runs on a Windows stack or how we include an Oracle database at the back end. We haven't had that challenge yet, and part of that is we focused very much on the problems that we knew we had a business reason to go solve. One of the key pieces of this conference is to get everybody excited. Right? We love to hear that. I love to sit in the keynotes and see the really cool stuff. I don't know if you guys saw the movie presentation from yesterday. I was just sitting there in the chair just in awe, right? Because I love that stuff. I'm a geek. I'm glad to say it. But in this realm, for this project, if there wasn't a business reason to do it, we don't have the time or the dollars to go invest on something that's not going to be immediately returning value to the organization. Within that integration platform, again, SOA-based, RESTful, SOAP-based service calls, the ability to secure those service calls over an HTTPS connection. Certainly there are legacy systems at the airlines that are going to use an FTP or an SFTP session and capabilities. I'm going to hold to talk about VPNs for a few minutes, but that's part of the realm as well. Business process management, a business rules engine in the back end, so that's important to have depending upon the application layer that needs to take advantage of it. Certainly databases, relational databases have a role to play. One of the other pieces within the database platform construct is not just the concept of an RDS type approach. Right? We do use Amazon RDS. It has worked very well for us for what we use it for. But we also have other capabilities and other levels of data stores that are necessary, running into the HDFS and the Hadoop and the Cassandra approach, and NoSQL solutions like S3 that really give you the ability to store large volumes of data in different ways. Right? You're going to get a lot better performance in certain scenarios out of a columnar storage data store than you are out of a traditional relational database. That user experience one cannot be overstated, and for me, my primary customer at that platform layer are the users who are going to come in and consume an application. And they're a very light concern, right? Because I got very few screens that we really worry about in that sphere. The applications will inherit those screens and then go off and do what they need to do. But from my perspective, my community, the biggest community from the platform, is the development community. If the developers can't figure out how to do it, and if you give them all the buttons, you can guarantee with any developer you ever work with, you give them 20 buttons, they're going to press every one of them at least twice, just to see what they do. So you better be sure that it works the way you want it to, and so you can maintain that user experience and that you can have a good feedback system for improving it. And then finally, the identification platform. So SAML 2.0 is the given standard here. Certainly lots of ways to implement that, lots of abilities to federate information. For right now, from a Boeing company perspective, we've really gone down that road to say we know how we can federate with an active capability or an active user's database, and we certainly have that request from airlines. We have not yet implemented true federation. I'll say true meaning two-way federation into this platform, but the standards and the architecture are there. It really depends more on the usage and the acceptance and the security criteria. The way we've approached this at this point is really a focus on providing an internal platform as a service, right? Really making the ability for developers inside of Boeing and its subsidiaries to use the platform in a common way. And then all the stuff there on the bottom, before working here, before working on the platform, one of the other things that I had the pleasure of doing was working in one of our highly available environments inside the company. So when we say lifecycle management, for me, that means governance. It means change, config, and release management. And so within the platform, there's been a constant focus of knowing who has permissions to do what, and when, and how do I log that so that if I have a problem, I can prove back to know who did it and how they got access to the resource by which they did. I'm going to skip the self-service moment for a moment because we're going to talk about it here in just a couple slides. So I've mentioned some of this. I tend to get ahead of myself when I'm excited about all the cool stuff that's going on. But one of the keys for us was this service-oriented architecture approach, taking a modular approach not only to the components within the platform, but all of those things that we have to bring in from the outside, whether that's a vendor's product, a COTS product, something we build ourselves. The goal is to be able to pick it up, turn it on, and then turn it off if it's not useful or if it doesn't work the way we want to. That middle bullet makes things real interesting. And so I'll stand up here first and say, Amazon is a great partner. They have an amazing set of functional capabilities, tremendous tool sets. But one of the things you didn't hear me say was Amazon DynamoDB. It's not because Dynamo doesn't do what it says it's going to do. It's not because there's a cost issue, at least from where we're sitting. It's because we have a requirement that's slightly different than other areas and other entities. We have to have the concept of that platform going and sitting on a different infrastructure that may not be Amazon, that may not be cloud, that may be bare metal behind an airline's firewall, because for regulatory reasons, for security concerns, or simply for the ability for an airline to use what they already have, because that's the way they understand it and that's the way they want to view the world, we have to have the ability to take that platform and transpose it onto something else. So while Amazon is fantastic, and I highly advise everything that's going on here at the conference, certainly many of their products offer tremendous game-changing capabilities, there are things for Boeing, and in this context, that we have to understand cannot just be Amazon and can't be specific to Amazon. We also wanted to be careful because going down this road, when you start offering solutions, the licensing model in the cloud world gets a little bit dicey. They're working to catch up. A lot of vendors are there. We've got some great ones down here that certainly are talking about how they do things and how they license in the cloud. But for an airline, the last thing we want to do is go create a huge barrier to entry. Come join, use this solution, leverage this platform, and oh, by the way, here's your 7 figures bill on the first day. So we have to be careful not to tie ourselves to those capabilities. And that last one, we talk a lot about Agile. How many people are running Agile development teams within their enterprise now? Okay, how many people are still running traditional waterfall approach, SDLCs? A few less. For everyone else, I'm not sure what you're running. I'd love to know, so come tell me afterwards. The Agile infrastructure that we talk about here really is about pairing up the development side with what the infrastructure provides you. And that's really talking about how do we put those skills in the right place, and how do we start and build fast, but then scale to where we need to. Constantly evolving and improving those capabilities is just a given. But extending it from your development team where they're focused on software to an infrastructure team where they're focused on network architecture and leveraging servers can sometimes be a mixed bag. So keep that in mind as you go forward, that you have to take an agile approach to both those things and not just assume that I'm going to order 50 servers at the beginning of the year and that's going to be sufficient from a capital planning process. So this is one I love to talk about. We had the privilege of working with one of our great customers over in Europe last year, and we had the opportunity to work through a case study with them. And we sat down with them, and we took a small team. And when I say small team, I mean small team. We took 5 people, and we worked with a key systems integrator for the airline, and we sat down and we said, what do you want to be able to see? In line maintenance, the mechanic's going to walk out to the airplane, they're going to greet that aircraft, and in the traditional, I'll say the non-digital aviation world, they're going to not know anything about that aircraft unless the pilot had the time, through the bounces and through safely getting you on the ground, to stop and call in and say, oh, by the way, I got a warning light on X or I got a notification on Y. The mechanic's going to basically meet that aircraft blind. Well, in certain aircraft situations, and this doesn't quite apply to our European customer, but in Hawaii, for example, on the island of Maui, if any of you have been there, the airline's maintenance sheds are not right where the aircraft meet. It's not like LAX or SeaTac where you have an overhang and right underneath there, that's where all the mechanics sit. In Maui, it's outside the airport fence, down a road, around a corner, and 35 minutes by truck to get off that airplane and go things. So if they meet that aircraft and realize, forgot this because I didn't know I needed it, right? They got to get back in that truck. They got to go that 35 minutes round trip to go get that part and bring it back planeside. You can guarantee every passenger on that airplane just experienced a delay, simply because the information was not present at the time in which it was needed. So with this scenario, the goal was within an iOS device, within a line mechanic application, we call it turn time, and we have this capability to show the information about the aircraft. But what we really needed was all the information and history about that aircraft as it came in. So pulling from the aircraft's legacy system, right, great systems out there, then great technology companies around the world that do this, pulling from that system meant looking at the APIs that were already available from that system, which was built on a legacy structure, non-SOA in the construct of how the application worked, but they had been forward-thinking enough to publish the APIs. That covered 80% of what we needed based upon the airline's requirements. Within a 3-week window, we established the connections that we needed between the airline's back office using a VPC and VPN connection, using Amazon, and you're going to love this, using the tip sheets because the guys had never done it before. And being able to, in 3 weeks, pop out the data that they need out of that system. Now, that was the 80%. The other 20%, the necessary portions that got you the final bits of data, which were kind of important because they were the flight schedule information and the part information that was critically available. So those two pieces, the availability of parts, had to be pulled out custom. So we went in and wrote a little script that pulled it out of the database, created ourselves a view, published it as an API, exposed it through the same way, and in the course of the next, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we basically had all of the capabilities that were necessary, and our application developers suddenly had all of this near real-time data available to them that they never had before. Suddenly the product managers were looking at this going, whoa, I can do that? Really? I could do that? I didn't know I'd have that before. I always had to call for that. So the product manager gets to channel that mechanic and suddenly gets to do things that they couldn't do before. Again, harnessing the power of the cloud, using the published information that Amazon already has out there, we were literally able to connect to that back office system and drop things into S3 buckets and then certainly populate them over into RDS as well, depending upon the kind of data. That last bullet is more for all of the executives in the room. You know, one of the critical things that we have and that I've had the privilege of is tremendous sponsorship and leadership. You know, one of the things that Boeing is very priding itself on is its ability to be innovative and be helpful and be driving. But the culture of innovation really starts from some key leaders in that company and empowering the team to go be successful and do something that's never been done before was critical. So if you have that opportunity, I cannot tell you how important that is to pick your leaders, pick your teams, and then let them run. Let them make mistakes and let them learn from those mistakes to get better. So again, keeping that agile infrastructure, agile development, it's a little bit of agile management as well. Okay, so resource slide. Boeing does not have, like we have for all of our airliners, a little factory in which we churn out fantastic cloud developers. We love to have that skill. We have fantastic partners, right? So for us, the key ability was to leverage some of our subsidiaries who have those talents in-house, the ability to really push through and solve key challenges. Well, Amazon gives us a bunch of cool stuff, but with that capability, and you know, the part of this that's kind of interesting, right? They're non-traditional skill sets. They're not just something you would normally find on a great dev team. If you have a fantastically high-performing team inside your company today, you can't just go pick up that team, drop them in space, and go, yep, they're going to be great with the cloud. You have to help them. You have to train them. You have to find those skills. And in our case, we had to find that partner. And that partner for us primarily was Infosys. Infosys really leveraged the great people that they have within their organization. They found the people for us. You know, Dave Christian, our infrastructure lead, fantastic gentleman who really knows what he's talking about. You know, background of this stuff. There are people out there, obviously by the size of this conference, there are people out there who really get the AWS cloud, really get IaaS. Part of our success was recognizing up front that there were things we didn't know. We had to go learn them. And the first way we learn them is find the smartest people that we can find and bring them inside our teams. And then, and don't forget this, plan for time for your best and brightest to work right alongside them and understand, right? Because in the end, you have to support production systems. And again, under that same vendor agnostic umbrella, Boeing wants to have the capabilities to really move forward strategically. The cloud and the technologies in this conference, the technologies in any infrastructure as a service, are key technologies that we have to have inside the company, key skills that we have to have inside the company. So knowing what those challenges are, knowing what those technologies are, is really critical. And that last one, again, be flexible. I know this contradicts every aspect of enterprise long-range business planning, but we've got to figure out, right? And we did. It took us a little bit, right? We've been working with Amazon now for 2.5 years. Last year was a bit of a challenge relative to understanding and forecasting what we think we would need, because we got into it and realized that what we thought we need in development or what we thought we need in architecture simply wasn't what we needed. Well, instead, what we needed was infrastructure. What we needed was experienced network designers. We needed some of those people who made that 4 nines available infrastructure within the Boeing company, because that's what we had to figure out how to do. Amazon will provide you great tools, but it's still up to you to set them up. So you have to know, how am I going to set up read replicas for RDS and span it across availability zones? How am I going to set up, if you have the requirement, a multi-region setup and be able to propagate data? And oh, by the way, what's that going to cost me? Got to be thinking about those things up front, and they're not easy to predict for long-range business planning. What I'd suggest is get with the account reps from Amazon and then go get those smart guys or gals that work with you that you've got from the industry partners that are out there, and ask for their opinion. And try really hard to listen, because they're going to say things that don't make any sense the first time around. I'll never forget the time that I was educated, this was maybe a little over 2 years ago, on the difference between CapEx and OpEx. And I spent 2 hours trying to understand why a utility-based model was all that different for computing. It certainly is, but if what I just said doesn't ring true for you, it's time to go find somebody and sit down with them who does understand that, and do your best to learn from them. Okay, as the data team reminds me on the platform all the time, they are the center of the universe. And not only are they the center of the universe, but without them, nothing matters. That's all true. But it's also without them that you don't have the necessary protections for intellectual property. You don't have the ability to know all of those different data elements, because the very last thing you want to do is take your data in all of its silos and go create nice little RDS buckets for every one of those silos. Right? That's not the answer. Right? Moving something to the cloud does not improve it by default. It will give you new opportunities, and that's fantastic. It will give you new ways of looking at things, and that's great. But you have to think differently, and it's the great opportunity when you move to the cloud to have the conversation you couldn't have 20 years ago or even 5 years ago about the key data elements, the key areas of your data that you need to be thinking about. And I'm not talking about down to the element level. That bottom picture is kind of indicative of this. If you're going to go down here, it's not about cutting down the whole forest. Very few of us can make the decision to go all in with our entire infrastructure in the enterprise sphere into AWS. And it's not because we don't like AWS, and it's not because it doesn't have value. It's because that's a really big ask, and that's a really big bet, right? I would bet there are very few enterprises here in the room who are willing to say, you know what, I'm just going to turn off my data center tomorrow. We'll figure it out in Amazon. That's not the right answer, and we know that. So from a data perspective, start with those things. And the data architects always get mad at me when I say data objects, because that means something apparently. But the data object level for me is an airplane, right? That's tail, and all the things that are associated to that tail. And I bet you if you spent the time, you could sit down with some of your information management people and you can create yourself effectively a mind map of all of the different components that go into your business. For us, we did that early, and it was hugely successful, because we knew for that line maintenance set of applications, we knew the 8 primary things that we had to have in order to make it successful. Now, we didn't know the 40 attributes of an aircraft that we had to have, because we didn't know until we got into application development that, oh, by the way, I need the engine model number and the serial number of that aircraft because it's specific to the maintenance manual. The product manager knew that, but the data guys didn't. So when you got into it and you started understanding that when you go walk up to an aircraft, A good example are the 777s. You could walk up to two 777s parked side by side at Heathrow in London, and they could have different engines on them. One from GE, one from Rolls-Royce, and suddenly you're going, wonder how that happened. Because the mechanic that just worked on this aircraft has to use a different manual working on the aircraft next door. So giving it context and understanding that the elements that you're going to need are going to come out, but they're going to come out at some point down the road. You're not going to know those up front. I will warn you, and the data guys would kill me for saying this, of course, but don't let them spin. Don't go stick them in a room for 3 months and tell them to build you a enterprise data model that you're going to go propagate to the cloud. You don't have time for it. You're not going to know that it's right. And when they come out 3 months later, your whole world will have changed, and you've got to start over. So understand at that object level and think about it at the data architecture level of how do those objects relate to each other. Then let your product management, your development efforts go down and find out. Now, there is one exception to everything I just said. If you know, absolutely know, that there's a critical piece of intellectual property that you shall not, will not, under any circumstances, ever move outside of your four walls of a data center, tag it right up front. If you know what your IP is and you know what that secret sauce is that nobody else has, right, you will never move that data anywhere but on its one server in its contained area, and no one gets access to that unless they have explicit permission to do so and a need to know. If you know what those are, hopefully you do, and if you know what those are, tag them right up front. And tell the information management team, do you think any of these elements are connected to these 8 objects that I threw on the board up here? Ask them that question, because if you have to go out there, and if for some reason your product that you're developing is suddenly critical to have one of those data elements, start the approval process right then and there, because those processes will take time. And although I will tell you that we have been tremendously innovative in digital aviation, we are not exempt from the challenges that every enterprise faces with governance, with process, with the overabundance of caution, which is the exact job of intellectual property, export compliance, and information security. Those organizations' job is to make sure that the company is protected. You being innovative is a threat at times because you're trying to move so fast that you don't know everything you need. We didn't know everything we needed. Having a great relationship, establishing great partnerships internal within the organization, within your company, across those organizational elements, that's critical. Right? And having the sponsorship, again, going back to the leadership, if you don't have executive sponsorship that's going to go say, yes, information security, you're going to have to dedicate X number of heads all year to this project because they're going to need you. I don't know how yet, but they're going to need you. You got to go get that sponsorship, and you got to go get those people because they are critical to your success in an enterprise space. All right, so if data is the center of the universe, security, however, is the big bat that just knocks the universe out. Security has to be done, and you'll say this again, in layers, but the key here is that you have a tremendous power and responsibility. I sat in the keynote here, our first one yesterday, when they talked about virtual desktops, and I immediately sent a note to Tom, and I said, Tom, I want to sign up for that. I want in the preview. I have this many guys, and I want them to be able to do it, and by the way, Friday would be great. So I'm all in there. I really want to go see what that does, but I'll tell you what, it scares me a little bit. And my information security guys, I bet you it scares them a lot. Because the same time I fired out that email to Tom, I also sent off an email that said, hey, I need you to go look at this. Go watch the keynote if you missed it this morning. These are some critical things, and I need to know how we're going to handle this, how we're going to approach governance and span. Because right now in our enterprise, as I expect is in most of yours, we have a very specific image that is put on every one of our development boxes. We have a very specific set of security measures, applications that are loaded to monitor traffic, to sniff out packets, to do all that other stuff. If my virtual desktop is sitting out there in the cloud and not connected to my network in any way, and I'm just running it, it also means I'm not managing it. Now that may be okay. It depends on how your processes are set up, and it depends upon the way you work with your people to establish what data do you take from inside your firewall. Again, going back to those key intellectual property elements, what data do you take and allow them to go put in this space without any approvals? What's pre-approved to use on a virtual desktop? Now, some of you may already have that in place. I can tell you we didn't, at least not in the context of a public cloud space. So that's one of the areas that I'm looking forward to next week, understanding how do we approach that, how do we drive that, and again, how do we authorize, right? And if there is something that isn't on that pre-approved list of things you can do, or software you can load, or things you can go configure within your AWS space, How do we get approval, and how do we make that as lightweight as possible, but still enough that we're protecting those key assets, right? Got to protect the key things that make us different. We do leverage Amazon Route 53 for DNS addressing, highly available space there. We do leverage Amazon ELBs and the ability to span across availability zones. We are, at this time, single-regioned, right? And that's a decision that we made primarily for scale and for SLA. At the time that we were developing, we weren't developing anything that was safety critical, and so we weren't in that space where we had to have 4 or 5 nines of reliability, so we didn't feel necessary to go to the regions. And so far, I'll say within the time span that we have, we do not have any requirement today to run in such a space or performance in such a space where we have to be outside the United States. It's something I didn't really touch here, but if you have a situation where you have a US company with US data and you're in any kind of protected industry, or you're using heavy encryption in any aspect of your products, export control laws and putting data over in a European data center or an Asian data center, even with Amazon, a US company, changes the regulatory scope just a little bit. That third bullet is kind of the anomaly on this page. Everything else is very positive, very exciting. Yes, this is what we can do. That third bullet says, whoa, don't just think you can throw 30 people at it and call it good. Just because you've spent what's equivalent to 5 years worth of headcount time trying to solve security problems does not mean you've solved security problems. Bring in the external space, bring in the penetration testing vendors, bring in the people who are literally going to try or be the white hats for you. Right? The folks who are going to try to pretend that they want to just absolutely take down your website or fill it up with garbage data or break into your S3 buckets or your RDS stacks. So work with those folks and bring them in and learn from the mistakes. Do it early. I didn't do it early enough. I wish I would have done it a year ago. We weren't mature enough. I thought, we'll get to it, but we're not close to production, so we'll wait. No, I wish I would have engaged with those guys 6 months before I did. Okay, so I've tapped at this the whole time, so I'll touch it briefly because I think I'm pushing time on Q&A. So a cultural shift is necessary. If your executives aren't at this conference, pick out the 3 things, the 3 presentations, the 3 slides. All of these are videoed. If you pick out me, that's great. But if you pick out, go talk to those other people, go find the decks, get the information available, and get it out to your executives, get it out to the decision makers, the key influencers in your organization, because there are things that are different here that are really, truly different, and not just about, oh, well, I don't know the names or I don't know the products. You have to think differently about infrastructure and development, and it's just a different world. So open that up. I mentioned the OpEx and CapEx models a little earlier. Understanding a utility approach to computing is a critical asset here as well. So this is the wrap-up slide. This is what we're trying to do. This is how we're doing it and what we're trying to end up with. The digital aviation world is not a 1 or 2 or 3 year play for the Boeing company. This is the future of where we're going with products, software, and technology. This is how we change commercial aviation. This is how we give profitability and efficiency to airlines as they've never been able to see before, because they've never had this kind of information, this kind of data, this kind of computing capacity at their fingertips, and never had the ability to do it themselves. Bring in the experts, educate them, give them great products, but also teach them to fish. Help them understand how they can use their own assets, their own computers, their own people to leverage this space. So for us, this is a long play, and it's a growth play. Boeing is a tremendous company. We are tremendously positioned. We are one of 2 major aircraft manufacturers in the commercial space. And I'll tell you what, I believe in the company. I believe in our products. I'd put my family on them every day of the week. And sometimes I do. But I'll tell you, the sphere of what we have here, the sphere of what we're offering for our industry, this is transformative. Amazon is transformative. The platform is transformative. And it's not a small step. It's not an incremental move. It is a step change to operations, revenue, and profitability in this space. Thank you for your time. I'll take any questions. There's mics here in the middle. I can try to repeat your questions if you don't want to get out of your chair. Go ahead. Anybody with questions? I was that good, huh? That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.